Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Tunnel Vision, a show brought to you by USCFootball.com. I'm your host, Keely Eure, joined by Ryan Abraham and Shotgun Spratling. We have a fun show for you guys today. Dare I say, the last Tunnel Vision of the offseason.
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, 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 dun. It's the last Tunnel Vision before we start fall camp, covering that on Friday. So we got a preview fall camp, what we're expecting for the Trojans in 2021. Let's talk about some breaking news. Bru McCoy is temporarily removed from team activities following a July arrest. We'll get into that. We'll talk about the Pac-12 and the Big 12. There's some reports about their commingling, if you will. They're having some talks. Whether or not that will result in anything, we'll see. But Pac-12 still in the news with realignment, so that should be interesting. As always, you can call us 512-4TUNNEL. Our intern Micah is standing by. We love hearing from you guys. You can also tweet at us, #TunnelVision, and I'll put your tweet up on the screen. And wherever you're watching, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, Periscope, whatever that is at this point, we love hearing from you guys. So put your comments, your questions, or your concerns, and we'll be sure to answer them as best as we can. But guys, like I said, it's the last television before fall camp.
Yeah, Friday. So it's fun. We get the email from Sports Information, gives you a list of all the practices. We got a little bit more access this fall camp, so we'll be able to shoot a little bit more. You get some more video highlights of some of the drills and stuff, so stay tuned for that. We should have some fun doing all that, but putting all the practices in, who we're going to be able to talk to. Yeah, it's an exciting time because, we talked about after Pac-12 Media Day, things start to speed up. When fall camp starts and when you got actual practices, things really begin to heat up. And we'll change our show schedule. We'll probably do a couple times a week, especially when the season starts. But it's real football again. 1 month until USC kicks off against San Jose State.
Crazy.
Seems a little crazy there. Apparently, Keely is muting me yet again, always trying to keep me from being able to speak. She's always trying to muzzle me as much as possible.
Of course.
No, another month till USC plays, which is kind of crazy to me. I wrote the date today, and I wrote 8, and I was like, August? This seems weird. How is it already August right now? But we're getting into the thick of it. It starts on Friday with fall camp. You'll have your what Todd Orlando calls not real practices.
Sure.
But then by Monday they'll be in pads, and we'll be out there to see some thumping and seeing if they can carry over what they started in the spring as far as building that culture and the steps that they were trying to make. If they can do that, this team could be very successful this season. The schedule is lined up for them to be very successful.
It is.
But it's going to start with the toughness, and that's going to be on the defensive side. That's going to be important, but also the offensive line. The offensive line will determine the potential of this team this season once again, and it starts with being tough.
Yep, I agree.
Ryan, one of the things we talked about on the Family Feud podcast was the intensity we saw spearheaded by USC's defensive staff in spring camp. We've always said that fall camp, it's kind of where the rubber meets the road as far as physicality and preparing for a season, making sure the guys are healthy. What do you think we're going to see this time around?
Yeah, you want to see that continue, like Shotgun just mentioned. You guys talked about on the podcast, and sometimes you would see like things start to ramp up, and then game prep comes in and things get, everyone, they take their foot off the gas. And I don't feel USC can afford to do that. The line play on both sides of the ball, there's going to be questions about who's going to play where. Chris had a good story about which incoming, which the young offensive linemen are going to be contributing. Is it Cortland Ford at left tackle? John Monheim, is he going to play right? Like there's questions on the offensive line for sure, but that defensive line, losing guys like Brandon Peely and Jay Toya transferring out, not sure if Ismail Sofsher is going to be able to play. There's some questions on the interior part of the defensive line too. So I feel like toughness starts on the lines, and how well are they going to build those out, and how well are those guys going to play? Are they going to let them hit? Are they going to let them go after each other? And then, one of the things, Keely, you asked Clay Helton about is the short yardage offense. And that was definitely something that was deficient. And I think that shows your toughness, too. And that's going to be a lot on the offensive line. Clay Helton did say that him and Graham had worked on that a little bit, and he's not going to share what they're going to do. But, that's one of those things where I think if you just want to look at the toughness of it, we're going to look at both lines. We're going to look at how they run the football in obvious run situations. And we want to see that intensity in practice, because we saw it when pads were on in the spring. They did some different drills. Does that continue on in the fall, or does it go like pretty much into game prep mode and everyone's just kind of going through the motions as opposed to actually hitting each other?
And another big thing that we saw in the spring was some variety of practice. Mixing up the practices, doing some different things, throwing in a drill, a goal line type of drill, where it's 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 in the middle of a practice when a practice is lull. When there's a lull in practice, are we going to see that, or is it going to be the way things have been for the past half decade, which is basically once you get into practice in fall camp, you establish the practice routine for that you're going to prep for the game, and you want to have that that routine down. So 4 weeks that you're going to practice it going into game week. Are we going to see that? So that can be something that's a positive in the fact that you get used to you know exactly what you're going to do and all that. But it can also be a negative because you got 18, 22-year-olds, and you got to mix things up. You got to constantly be pushing them in different ways and challenging them in different ways, I think, to really get the best out of them. So that's something that they did in the spring. We're going to see if they do it in the fall. And I thought in the spring it was really physical early, and then you saw a bunch of guys banged up. And the last couple of weeks it was, let's experiment, let's move guys around.
Yeah.
Much more less competitive in that nature. Are we going to see that in fall camp?
Yeah.
That's going to be a big question too, because that's been something that has hampered USC year over year over year. Is halfway through fall camp, you got 25 guys that aren't practicing, and how much better are you going to be able to get as a team if a quarter of your team's not available to practice? And again, that may come back to, are you hurt versus are you injured, or what are they doing? With the strength and conditioning, with the nutrition, to be able to keep them healthy, to be able to go through the fall camp and then through the rigors of a season. You don't want to push guys too much in a fall camp because you want to be healthy going into that first game. But fall camp is a great opportunity to get better.
Yeah.
We saw some guys in spring camp that really took some big steps. From the beginning of spring camp to the end of spring camp, and we've seen that in the past with other guys. Can we see that in the fall camp? If you're not on the field, it's hard to get better.
Yeah. Got to compete. There's got to be great competition out there, and you can't compete if you're on Rehab Island. So less people on Rehab Island, more people competing for spots, and you're going to do okay.
Prior to the pandemic, one of the main things we heard from USC's new defensive staff was how important it is to instill culture. And like you mentioned, guys, spring camp, I think they finally got a chance to start to impose the culture that they want out of the team. But how much will, the full offseason that they had and fall camp being able to have time to install culture, but also just their schemes? I mean, even Sean Snyder, the special teams coordinator, said he had to go a little bit simple with what he was telling Parker Lewis and guys like that. How much will more time help some of the quote-unquote new guys on the staff?
I think I take what Todd Orlando said. I'll take his word for it. I mean, he I thought he articulated himself very well. Everything he said made sense, and he was able to do what he wanted to do in the spring. That should set him up for those summer workouts where they were getting to do the conditioning and stuff with all of his linemen and all the defensive players, and heading into fall camp. And I think they should all know a lot of the scheme of what he expects there, but also just how hard he wants them to work. So having a full off season, I think that's going to pay dividends when we see this team in the fall. I think it's going to be a better defensive unit than we've seen in the past. So like when we heard from him in the spring, I thought he made a ton of sense. Sometimes you hear coaches talk and it's coach speak. I never felt that way with Todd Orlando. So I'm curious to watch how they progress, but I think he's going to be on the schedule he wanted to be on as opposed to last year when he couldn't.
Yeah, it's hard to instill a culture if you're not on the practice field. It's hard to instill, the camaraderie that you're trying to build with that culture if you're in groups, and you're not with other position groups. Keely, I can't remember, who told Keely, but one of the players that we've talked to during PRP said, hey, I just got to meet some of the other players from the position groups.
Yeah. it was Kobe Pepe who was like,
Yeah.
I only really knew 5 to 10 people on the team in 2020 because the pods and the restrictions that they had. He was like, I just met Jackson Dart today. He's a cool dude. It's like, okay, wow. So yeah, and same with, I actually talked with Cortland Ford last week, and he was saying, I know the team completely better now. It's just crazy how much the incoming COVID freshmen really didn't have the football experience. They didn't have a full season. And Cortland Ford described the incoming freshmen as like the forgotten freshmen because the fans weren't there to see them play or have their debut. And now they're kind of like new, but they're sophomores heading into the season. It's a weird dynamic.
Yeah, and you can build a great culture in a position room. And you see that across the country. Certain positions at certain schools are really good, and they have a legacy, when they can keep a coach there. But is that going to carry over the whole team if you're not around the entire team? If one group is slacking off, if you're in a full team environment, then somebody can get on them. An older guy comes in from from the other side of the ball or from a different position, say, hey, that's not how we do it, blah, 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 you go forward. But if you're in small groups, you can't really do that. So that's one of the things that they weren't able to do last year. And also, there were a ton of guys that needed those reps, particularly on the offensive line. Tim Drevno was in a tough spot because they were moving 4 guys on the offensive line. They had 4 players at new positions, to start last season, and they didn't have time to work on it. They had 1 walk-through practice in the spring, and that's it. And then you get to fall camp, and you're trying to rush to get ready for games. So, it wasn't a great spot to be put in for that offensive line. Do we see them take a big jump? That's a big question mark. Because there are guys in that group. You talked about Cortland Ford and Jonah Monheim, and we expect some positive things from them. There's some older guys that need to prove themselves. Yeah. So I think they have an opportunity. The Liam Jimmons, the Jalen McKenzie, at new positions last year, can they take a jump forward? That's going to be potentially a big key for the offensive line. If those older guys, you hope those younger guys push them, but you want those older guys to take a jump forward as well. So we'll see where some of those guys are. I think that having the full offseason, full strength and conditioning program and everything that way, I think that's going to be very beneficial for USC. Obviously, it's something that happened all around the country, but for USC, when you are installing a whole new defense and you have a new strength coach coming in this January, I think that having the full offseason will be really big for them.
Shaka, what did you take away from your PRP conversations with players about Robert Steiner and the work he's done so far?
When you ask about Robert Steiner, the players, like, their eyes not necessarily light up, but you see there's intrigue there, because they want to talk about him. They think it's, the different things that they're doing. Your conversation with Drake London, him talking about how they would build stuff. They come out there and the strength coaches are, have a new wooden apparatus for them to work out with. They said they just built this apparatus for them to have this workout. I talked to Isaiah Pullman. He's talking about, I said, what's the most unique thing you've done? And he said, man, we've been doing some different things. And he said, probably carrying your teammates, literally carrying your teammates. And that's something that you can build as a psychological thing, as as a mental preparation as well. The potential of, hey, you need to be able to carry your teammate. But he said they literally are picking up their teammates and carrying them in their arms or carrying them on their backs as part of their workout, while they're, doing some, back and forth runs or whatever it may be. I said, does anyone are you guys glad that Brandon Peely's he's not able to come out right now and participate because he's injured? You don't want him to be a guy that you have to carry around anyways. He's like, no, I've been carrying Greg Johnson and Chase Williams, so
that's easier.
Good to carry them.
Yeah, but I just think that you see kind of the players they definitely, their attention has been caught by the strength and conditioning staff. In that they're doing things that are different, and a lot of players have talked about that they're doing things that are functional strength skills. So quarterbacks are working on things that are going to help their arm and the care in their arm. They're not all doing the same exact drills over and over, and a lot of the stuff is functional lifts for football as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to get into the news that broke on Monday. We got a question from Bryce who said, do you think we're done seeing Bru McCoy in Cardinal and gold? So if you hadn't heard the news, he is removed from team activities temporarily due to arrest that happened in July. The arrest was because he was charged with felony intimate partner violence with injury. And so with USC, they obviously suspended him from team activities. I did get a statement from USC that said they're aware of the situation, and USC's Office for Equity, Equal Opportunity, committee in Title IX is reviewing it. And they didn't want to go into more details because of federal student privacy laws. But we know the history with USC and these type of cases, how they like to review things and keep players away from the field until everything has been sorted in that sense. And I put in the story that sources suggested that it's a serious matter, and we likely won't see Bru McCoy on the field at least in 2021. So that's something at least to watch out for there, because I know some fans were expecting him maybe back on the field soon or whatever. But given the precedent that USC has set with these type of cases, I just don't think we'll be able to see him at least for this season.
Yeah, and Keely, great job, breaking the story. This was, it's never easy doing a story like this because it's, there's victims, there's young lives that could be changed forever and will be changed forever. And Bru McCoy, former 5-star player, you remember, coming to USC, going to Texas, coming back, had a mysterious illness. There's been he's someone that USC fans wanted to see on the field quite a bit. And there was all kinds of drama. Not saying it's his fault, but there was just always something going on. And now this, and, I agree with Keely. The question on there, I don't know. I mean, the way we've seen, allegations like this come in the past, you usually don't see that player again in Cardinal and Gold. So, I mean, if you put me on the spot and had me bet if I were ever going to see Bru McCoy play in a Trojan uniform again, I would say probably not. I think it's more likely he doesn't than he would. But certainly don't expect to see him back this season at all. There's going to be legal proceedings that go through, and we'll kind of get updates as that goes along. But, it's certainly an unfortunate situation. He was likely going to be the number 2 wide receiver on a group that you've lost a couple of big names from last year. There's a lot of talent there, but not a lot of proven talent. He's someone that actually has produced some on the field, and I think USC fans were really excited to see him take that next step. Whenever it's a 5-star player in the system, you always want to see them because you follow their recruitment so hard, and the fans are super excited when they actually sign. Now, he signed and left and came back. There was a lot of excitement and disappointment with Bru McCoy, and obviously this would be in the disappointment category.
Yeah, we got an opportunity to see him last year, and in a reserve role, and he took over some of those snaps from Tyler Vaughn's, and was pushing into that group and getting some playing time, and had a couple big touchdowns for USC last year. So we expected a big jump for him this year, taking over potentially a starting role and being one of the guys that USC was counting on. So this is going to, the wide receiver group, it's wide open. We were talking how, the third wide receiver was going to be an open slot, and who's going to fill that in? Now, you got Drake London, and you got a bunch of question marks. There's a lot of talent. You've got some talent transferring in. You've got some talent returning, but, unproven in a USC jersey. So, and to answer the question, it's, when's the last time you saw anyone even arrested for anything at USC? It just, in recent memory, I can't think of one off the top of my head that's returned to the team.
Yeah.
Pretty much, and, in a situation like this, a much more serious offense than, hey, you got in a brawl at a bar or something, then, we haven't seen any of those players return to USC. So, we hope for the best for everyone involved. Hope everything gets resolved in a timely manner, but if you're betting on it, you don't think that Bru McCoy is going to be back.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean
from the precedent and the seriousness of the charges.
They're definitely serious charges, and we don't know obviously all the details and stuff going on, but it's something we'll have to pay attention to. But it's a little bit of a curveball for USC. Korey Foreman in the wide receiver room, he was definitely someone that the Trojan, the team was expecting to have a lot of production. So something we're going to follow, and it's. Again, good job, Keely, on this one, and we'll keep you guys updated on how this plays out. But I'm glad you put that in the story, Keely, because I think it's important. There's going to be fans that are like, well, he could come back the second week of fall camp. Like, don't expect that.
Unless everything is dropped and kind of gets forgotten about, which that has not happened around USC. I mean, his court date is, I believe, November. So
November 24th, yes.
If it goes to the court date, you're basically the regular season is almost over.
Yeah.
There's like a week left in the regular season. So, USC is not going to put him back out there before things are resolved. That just hasn't been, again, back to the precedent that has been set in the last decade, the last 5 years or so with any type of legal issues. So there's no expectation from me that he'll be back playing for USC this season. Hopefully everything does get resolved, but don't expect it.
Yeah, and Keely reported he's out on $50,000 bail, so he is not in jail right now, but he was. They posted bail, so he's out and awaiting trial, and so I don't think we'll see anything resolved until well after that.
Yeah, that bail amount is standard for that type of charge, so it wasn't like they thought he was an extra risk, if that makes sense. But no official charges have been made by a DA yet, so charges the original arrest charge could be dropped, but even still, it's my understanding that even if the charges were dropped, USC would still go through its process of reviewing that case, and so that in itself would still keep Bru off the field because USC has to clear him as well. So just some info there. But I mean, it's a hard transition, but I know we talked about how USC was expecting Bru to be that number 2 receiver. Who do you expect now to step up in that role? I know Kyle Ford is a guy who's coming back from that ACL injury. I believe one of you talked to him and he said he's cleared to go, but what are you expecting just from the wide receiver room now?
I'm a big Kyle Ford guy, so this is his chance. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here. I mean, we've seen some of the young guys. Is it a Gary Bryant Jr. that emerges? Is it Michael Jackson? Is it, Manjack? Is it Taj Washington? I mean, there's a lot of guys. I think there's a lot of opportunities. And outside of Drake, you got Drake London. Outside of that, like, it's all wide open. I think almost anyone can come in and contribute. Bru was going to be that number 2 guy. Like, he was, like, penciled in there. And now it's wide open.
I think that it's a land of opportunity, but it's going to be who stays healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, Gary Bryant Jr., you would look at him and go, that should be the next guy up. He hasn't stayed healthy yet at USC. Kyle Ford, can he stay healthy coming back from multiple ACL injuries? Is he back to the form that he had 2 years ago when we saw him in high school? Taj Washington is a guy that, I got big expectations for as a freshman All-American at Memphis, but he's a smaller guy. Can he stay healthy? Jake Smith, another guy from Texas who has produced at Texas, smaller guy, though. You're worried about those guys take a bad hit or something. Can they stay healthy? That's a big question for me. And what are they trying to get out of that interior position, the third wide receiver? Because I think that will determine what you do with the second position. If you're looking for a smaller, short guy, a quick guy in the slot, then I think that changes what you're looking for on the outside. Do they see it as reversible? We can line up anybody where we want and do that. We'll look for mismatches. They haven't done that in the past. So, I wouldn't think that would be the first choice, but that's another option.
Sure.
There's a lot of options that they have, but, until we see them out there and see what those transfers, Taj Washington, Jake Smith, Malcolm Epps, are you seeing him as a big wide receiver or is he playing with his hand on the ground?
Yeah.
A lot of things that we're still not certain about. Where are Jake Smith and Taj Washington and Gary Bryant lining up? Inside, outside? Drake London feels like the only certainty, but he's not even a certainty because you don't know where he's going to be.
Yeah.
We tried to ask him at media day, hey, are you going to be inside, outside? And he was very non-committal about it.
We'll see.
So we thought, hey, he moved out there in the spring. That seems like a set change. No, not exactly. That,
And this, Bru not being available, that could change that too. If
exactly.
If they like the way that pairing was, we might see more tight end. Pretty deep group of tight ends. We might see more of them without Bru. I mean, who knows? So I think this could have ramifications throughout the entire offense, not just that wide receiver spot.
Mm-hmm. I put it up earlier, but Dallas had a question. He thinks that Keontae Ingram's going to be RB1. Who do you expect? I think we all agree that Keontae Ingram and Vavae Malepeai are going to be 1 and 2 in some configuration, but we don't know which configuration that will be.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's going to be Vavae, but I think Ingram's going to be right there. It's going to be. I think those two guys are going to be the ones you see a lot.
I mean, who makes the decision? Is it Clay Helton making the final decision? Is it Mike Jinks? Mike Jinks, he didn't recruit Vavae Malepeai.
Yeah.
Vai's from Hawaii. Ingram's a Texas guy. Jinks is a Texas guy. A lot of the offensive coaches are Texas guys. Does that play into it? Their familiarity with him being at Texas. How does that play in? Or is it Clay Helton? Vai's been here. He's been our guy. He's been our Mr. Consistency. That's who we're going with. Those, how that plays into it. And then, again, we think those are going to be the two guys that are 1 and 2.
Yeah.
How much, what is that breakdown? Are we talking 50-50? Are we talking 60-40, 80-20? What is this breakdown? Mike Jinks said this spring that he wanted established number one and number two, and those who he's gonna ride with, rather than trying to mix 3 or 4 guys in, which I think is a great idea. If you can find some unique ways to use 3 and 4, then do it. But hasn't been, again, not something they've really done in the past. So when you just stick Keenan Kristen in for one play, the first play of the fourth quarter of the UCLA game is very, you know, everyone's keyed on. Like, that guy hasn't played at all today. Pay attention to him.
Right, exactly.
He's getting the ball. Then that doesn't usually work. So if you're going to go 1 and 2, how much are those guys in? Is it really a true number one? And just when he's tired and needs a sub, then we'll get somebody in, or are we getting full rotation? You know, there could be different ways. And again, that's the thing about fall camp. I think there's a lot of questions with personnel and lining up and how, you know, we'll see some of those things that we're going to be watching as well.
And we should be able to film them going through some of those running back drills, and you'll be able to see some of the stuff that we were seeing there so early on. So
exciting.
those will be fun. Yes, you can kind of like, oh, I haven't seen Ingram run. He looks good. You know, stuff like that.
And speaking of lining up and what we see in camp, I think one of the biggest questions, which is interesting because we usually don't even fully talk about this position group, tight ends. I think the addition of Malcolm Epps and Michael Trigg, could be different for USC's tight ends, but how do they want to use them? Are they going to make it an emphasis to use them? We'll see, I guess.
They're big. They look good. I mean, we saw Josh Follow walk by the other day. He looked good to me. There's good athletes there.
Yeah.
Look, it's kind of a waste if they're not being used somehow.
Yeah.
Again, what do you want from that position?
Yeah.
Do you want a Drake London? You know, the Malcolm Epps, or, you know, you put Jude Wolfe out there. Those guys can catch the ball. Do you want a guy that's going to play the H-back too? That's I don't know what they want from the position. You know, they've used him as the H-back. They've used Drake London as that guy because they didn't feel like they had the tight end that could do both. Is one of these new guys coming in, or has somebody developed that extra skill, you know, with an actual full off season? Has someone taken a step forward? You know, that could be the case. And if they can get somebody that can do both, block in the backfield and be used as an H-back, be used on the end of the line, stay in as extra pass protector, do those things, and then go out and be a mismatch outside, then that's ideally what you want. But do they have that on the roster? Big question still.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Overall, on offense, do we all agree that the way the offensive line goes is how USC's, at least offense, you could say, season goes? How critical is the offensive line?
I thought, it's critical. Can Keaton Slovis sling the ball around the field, you know, running around and be able to have an effective passing offense? I mean, he did that last year in a lot of spots. Yeah, I think that could happen. But if you really want the offense to be successful, the run game has to be effective. The short run game, you need it to be. And you got to keep Keaton up. This is not a 5-game regular season anymore. This is going to be a full 12 games. If he's running for his life in all of them, the likelihood of him being knocked out goes up exponentially. So I think the offensive line is going to have to play well. They could have it play poorly and go 8-4, 9-3 just by him throwing the football around. But if you really want to have success and beat some of the better teams on the schedule, I think you need the offensive line to perform well.
They can go 10-2 without running the ball.
Yeah, probably.
If they can still protect Keaton. And he's back to where he was, you know, and we see the confidence. If he's getting beat up, he's going to lose that confidence real quick. So I think it's all on them for the offense, but I still think they can be successful even if they can't run the ball, but can you at least pass protect? You know, the problem is they haven't done either one of them really well in this air raid offense. You know, they've let the quarterbacks get beat up, and the pass protection has been good for 85 to 90% of the plays, but that can't be the case. You know, when your quarterbacks are taking big shots, not just taking hits where they're holding on the ball for 6-7 seconds and they're scrambling around, but you're letting a guy one move and he's getting into Lecky Fotu, hits Keaton Slovis and knocks him out of the Utah game. You know, that can't be the case. You can't have your quarterback, I think it was, 5 times that the starting quarterback went out of a game in 2019. You can't have that happen. And obviously the injury at the end of the season affected Slovis in 2020.
Sure.
So, they need to be able to protect him. And if he feels confident with the guys in front of him, I think that's only going to boost his confidence, and you're going to see his confidence continue to grow. And, when he starts getting on the same page with some of these offensive weapons that he now has, I think that, that the offense can take off. And we see that year 2 jump that they talked a lot about going into the 2020 season that we never really saw last year.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we jump into the defense and what we're expecting to see in fall camp and in 2021, I'm actually going to go to a caller. It's our buddy Dave from Iowa. I believe he has a question about the offense, hence why we're going right now. Hello, Dave. You're on live with Tunnel Vision.
Hey, Tunnel Vision. Good to talk. I just wanted to talk about recruiting. I don't know if you guys noticed, but Notre Dame picked up a stud wide receiver out of the state of Washington. So, I also noticed that they have a lot of predictions for the wide receiver from Modern Day. I apologize. I don't remember his name right now. But my question is, do you think winning, like USC winning and winning the Pac-12 championship, would be enough for us to flip those weapons? Love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, he's talking about Tobias Merriweather, who committed to Notre Dame today over offers from a lot of the West Coast schools. In his final five, I think he had Washington, Oregon, USC as well. USC was never really in the mix there at the end on that one. With C.J. Williams, the wide receiver from Modern Day, who's a beast, very similar to a Kyle Ford, to a Michael Pittman, to Bru McCoy, that big physical wide receiver that we've seen come out of the Trinity League, out of the Southern section. I think that USC, if they're winning and they actually put in the effort with some of these local kids, because they put in so much effort on the national kids and the Texas kids, but I feel like some of the local kids, from what I've heard, they feel like they're just not getting as much love from USC as there are from some other schools. And that's kind of, unnerving if you're a USC fan. You're looking at it as, usually there's a 5-star receiver or 2 or 3 in Southern California in every class. And
USC gets them,
And usually USC, if there's 2, USC gets at least one of those. Yeah. Right now, you got C.J. Williams, who's high 4-star, is in that mix. Notre Dame is the leader there. You got Tetora McMillan at Servite. His 2 teammates, including former USC commit Keon Burnett, are already committed to Arizona, and Noah Fafita, the quarterback, is already committed there. So he's, Arizona looks like the leader there.
Jed Fish is doing well at Servite.
Yeah. And so those are guys that USC in a normal cycle 5 years ago, you would say, oh, those guys are definitely going to USC. They get to pick the litter that they want, especially at the wide receiver position where USC has had so many studs in the last decade. But right now, that's not the case. Now, if you win and put in that effort, and I think that's something where I think early on in the cycle, recruiting cycle, they went out, and I think they'll come back in, especially when in the fall when the California players are able to play in a season. They got the spring season, and some teams it was like 3 games. So I think when they, the fact that other states like Texas were able to play a full season last year, the better evaluation, I think that's something USC is going to cycle back to the local kids when they get to see them and evaluate them better in the fall. So that might be the case, but will it be too late then?
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Dave, for the call. We appreciate it. Now, jumping into the defense, I think the 2 biggest questions, or the main theme, is replacing key guys. At first, we thought it was going to be Marlon Tuipulotu, which you're still replacing him, but then it became Jay Toya. How is USC going to replace him? That was a guy who definitely stepped up in USC spring camp. We thought he might be able to fill in that hole a little bit, but he transfers to UCLA. And then also Talanoa Hufanga. How do you fill in that spot? He was a guy who Todd Orlando could plug and play in a lot of places when he needed him to. How do you fill those important roles that are now gone?
It's tough in the interior defensive line because it's not just, Jay Toya going and, Marlon Tuipulotu. He's gone. You also, Jay Tufele was around and, he opted out last year. Brandon Peely is out with an injury. I mean, and you thought Ismail Sofshire would be coming in, and he's listed as some kind of might be limited in 2021. He had that compartmental syndrome surgery thing. What was it? Compartment
syndrome in both of his legs.
Yeah, so had to have surgery for that. He's someone else that you transfer in as a former blue chip recruit. He can play. And there's just more questions than answers for sure. I mean, you talk to Kobe Pepe, maybe someone like that's going to come in and play well, but there's going to be some young bodies in there and guys that we weren't expecting. It's just not going to be as deep. I think you're better in the secondary, not better overall. I mean, Talanoa Hufanga was just a playmaker back there, but they have Dante Williams, Craig Navar. They've recruited that position well. They got some transfers. I think there's plenty of studs that they have to choose from. If you look at that roster, I mean, it's all 4- and 5-star guys. So I think they'll be okay there. It's hard to replace a guy like Talanoa because he did make a whole bunch of plays, but they have enough good bodies there. I would be more concerned on the defensive interior.
Yeah, I think the defensive tackle position is the biggest question mark going in. I thought USC did a really good job of going in the transfer portal and looking for guys to fill in those voids. You know, you lose Talanoa Hufanga, you get Xavion Alfred. You also add Chris Thompson Jr. later, the transfer from Auburn. So you got a pair of safeties that have some experience in college coming in to join, you know, what should be a great position battle. You know, you're going to have Isaiah Polamalu there somewhere, but then where are the other two spots, you know, with the nickel safety and the other safety spot? You know, is it Greg Johnson, Max Williams being out? You know, is it Chase Williams? Does he take a step forward and take over a starting role? Is it one of those young guys? Is it one of those transfers? There's a lot of options there. You lose Elijah Griffin, and people kind of forget about that. He was pretty much a shutdown corner for USC last year, but I think Isaac Taylor-Stewart's ready to take that step forward and, you know, be a dude finally for USC. You know, if he continues the way he did in the spring, I think that he's going to have a terrific season. And Chris Steele on the other side, I think the corners should be perfectly fine. But the big question, in the middle of the defensive line, how are you going to address that? Is it Ishmael Shafter? Is he going to be able to come back by the end of the, you know, by the beginning of the season? Is he going to be ready to go and you feel like he can plug and play? Is it one of those young guys that have taken a step forward, you know, with Kobe Pepe and Jamar Sakona, you know, Dejon Benton? There's some other guys in there that could be in the mix. A lot of inexperience, though. Not much playing time among any of those guys. It's something like 30 snaps on defense. It's very little playing time in a game. So we'll see if any of those guys are ready to step up. Or what I'm curious about, and we talked about this in the Family Feud podcast when we wrote down the defense, is do you try to attack it schematically rather than personnel-wise? You know, rather than putting, you know, do you try to put two defense tackles in there to clog up the middle and give you another big body? Or do you try to attack more with your linebackers at the line of scrimmage? They play more inside. There's some different things that Todd Orlando could do. I'm curious to see if that's the case. And, you know, you got some freak talents on the edges that can create pressure. And if you can do that, then that helps out the back where you're trying to fill in that hole for Talanoa Hufanga, where you're trying to fill in for Elijah Griffin. But it also can help out those interior guys because if you can get some pressure off the edge and get in the run game, early downs, you get some, you know, 2nd and 12s, you know, you end up with the pass rush situations on 3rd down, then that helps out those nose tackles as well.
What are your expectations for Korey Foreman coming in? I know when you have a high-rated guy like him, the composite #1 guy, there's a lot of high expectations. But, again, he's also a freshman. What do you expect for him in fall camp at least?
Just the way USC's marketed him already, I don't think there's any way you could keep him off the field. I think you can't hype them up as much as they have and not use him in some capacity. I think he's going to be probably a day one starter. I think you're going to see a lot of him out there. Probably, you know, some hand on the ground, just getting after the quarterback, trying to disrupt plays, and they're going to, you know, tell you about it. They got the, you know, another 5-star defensive lineman, locked up for the next class of 2022. I think you're always thinking about recruiting, and if you got a 5-star come in that's not contributing, like that's not going to help you. So they've, you know, that's something they've talked about because they took some slack, you know, some flack for some of the poor recruiting classes in the last couple of classes. When you get a guy like him, I think you're going to talk about him. They did, and I think you're going to use him.
Shotgun, you seem a little bit hesitant on Ryan's take.
Yeah, a little bit hesitant because I don't know what position he's going to play. If he's playing the same position as Drake Jackson, he's not starting day one. Drake Jackson's going to start. You know, are you lining him up in a different spot? Do you see those two guys on the same side of the field? Where does Nick Figueroa fit in? Where do the other pass rushers that, you know, have proven themselves a little bit more? Nick Figueroa was terrific, you know, last year as a pass rusher, very underrated. He could jump over him. Do you see more rotation with those guys? I think that might be the answer. I don't know if he's a day one starter, but I think he's going to be in the mix in the rotation for sure. How much are they asking for him? How quickly do they try to, you know, push that? Because you don't want to put too much on a freshman early. Pass rushers, the one thing is you can just say, go get the quarterback. You know, we'll put you in certain situations with elite pass rushers. That's one reason why they get ranked a little bit higher than other players because they can make an immediate impact because you put them in a third and long situation. You say, go get the quarterback. Go get to the quarterback. And those guys that have elite raw skills like Korey Foreman does, can go do that. And now you start to build on that as the season progresses. And you add a little bit more to the plate, a little bit more to the plate. So I think that may be the trajectory a little bit more than day one starter because, they were recruiting him at the same position as Drake Jackson. Now, I think that they're going to line him up a little bit different. That's another thing that I'm looking forward to seeing in the fall is where some of those guys line up.
Sure.
Do we see 4 down linemen or 5 down linemen? Do we see some different looks with those fronts? There's a lot of different things they can do because there's a lot of talented pass rushers.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking at special teams, it's interesting. At punter and place kicker, we kind of know what to expect, Parker Lewis and Ben Griffiths. But for returners, you lose Tyler Vaughns, you lose Amon-Ra St. Brown to the NFL, and then Stephen Carr, who's been a mainstay back there, he transfers to Illinois. So who are you expecting? I know we saw Gary Bryant Jr., we mentioned on the Family Feud podcast, that return against UCLA. That was kind of the spark to bringing that team back to win. But what are you expecting? I know in fall camp it's usually a big group of guys, and then as the camp goes on, it whittles down.
You get a few defensive guys, you get a bunch of receivers, maybe a couple running backs. But I think it's going to start with Gary Bryant Jr. I think he's going to get a lot of opportunities. But we're going to see a lot of dudes. And usually that's a thing we can film too, so we can watch them. And you can see some of the guys catching the football and how they're able to return. We're probably not going to see them like full on just weaving through guys. It's more just about going through some of the motions. But there will be a pretty big group. You could get like Sierra Wright. You get some freshmen in there. I think you're going to see a lot. But I would guess Gary Bryant Jr. If I had to bet right now, he'd be the one that's going to come out on top.
Jalen Smith, Prophet Brown. There's some different options that you have there. Will we see one of these transfers to come in? Do we see Jake Smith or Taj Washington, guys that have speed? What are they looking for out of each of those positions, kick returner and punt returner? Are they looking for a guy with jukes and then could take off? Or are they looking for a guy with straight speed?
Katie Nixon could be.
Yeah, Katie Nixon's a guy that could be in that mix. He's returned for Colorado as well. So I think there's a lot of options. I think Gary Bryant's the guy that you would expect to be the front runner, at least to begin with. Obviously, he had the big kick return in the UCLA game that set up the game-winning touchdown. So, he's already proven that he can do it. The other guys have to step up and do that. A guy to keep an eye on, and partially because I don't know where he fits otherwise, is Keenan Kristen. So much speed. You got to find a way to use him. It could be such a weapon. Maybe it's on special teams that they find that because there's, they haven't given him those opportunities at running back the last year. So maybe it's on special teams that he really makes a mark.
Mm-hmm. Overall, where do you guys have the biggest questions? Special teams, defense, or offense?
Definitely not special teams. I feel comfortable with Sean Snyder. I would always harp on special teams before, and now it's just like, yep, they'll be good. In general, it's probably going to be on the offensive side of the ball. It wasn't as an efficient and effective offense in 2020 as we were expecting. We don't know how the offensive line is going to shake out. They do have to get better at the short yardage stuff. You can, like Shotgun said, they can win a lot of games and not have great offensive line play. But if they want to win the Pac-12 and beat teams like Notre Dame, you have to get that line to play. So I would say the biggest concerns on the offense and specifically the line.
Yeah, offensive line once again, and I'm curious to see the impact that Clay McGuire has. Full off season, new offensive line coach. We saw some different things in the spring that felt like they were Clay McGuire inspired as far as some of the play calling and stuff with short yardage situation. He's the only difference on the offensive staff, and they were doing different things. So that would tell me it was having an influence there. Graham Harrell trusts him. I think it was played with, coached under, coached beside, and now
works for.
Yeah, so I think he's gone the whole gamut.
Full circle.
With Graham Harrell from their time at Texas Tech to Washington State to now USC. So I think Graham really trusts him, and his input will have an impact on seeing some different wrinkles potentially. And again, if you don't run the same play on 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 every single time, you got a better chance of being able to pick it up, even if your offensive line doesn't block great. When the other team doesn't know exactly what you're running, which is what it felt like a lot of times last season.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what does it say about, the team in general that the biggest question is not the new defensive staff, quote unquote new, but the offensive staff, which we expected to take a jump in year 2, and now in year 3, there's even more question marks. How much of that is the offensive staff or just offensive line recruiting coming to roost in that sense?
There's been some poor choices made by USC leadership, from athletic directors to Clay Helton, and they've tried to fix a lot of those. I mean, one of them was having an offensive line coach for 2 seasons that didn't match the system that you were running. I mean, that's just, and he was your running backs coach before. There was just some weird staff moves that just didn't make much sense. And then you get some bad recruiting classes. You get a lot of bodies, but maybe not a lot of people that can play, at least up until this point. And so you're in year 3 of Graham Harrell, and this is the first time he has a spread offensive line coach or someone that has run some version of the air raid. So, yeah, I think that's why it's more about these decisions that were made a couple years ago. Hey, we're going to make Tim Drevno the offensive line coach, even though you're running an air raid, and he's never coached in that before. And I think those are like, we criticize those kind of decisions right here, but why is that a concern 2 years later? Because you made that poor choice 2 years ago. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's a coach. The match works a lot better. Just Tim Drevno, bringing him in as a running backs coach, moving him offensive line, just no experience in this type of offense versus an offensive line coach that's basically been his entire career.
Yeah.
And again, that has a great relationship already with Graham Harrell from their days as players at Texas Tech to coaching Washington State, USC. So I just think that the connection there is so much different that you should see that part of it be a lot more in sync at least. And if that's the case, then I think you take some small steps forward. If you take the small steps, maybe that leads to the big jump that everyone was expecting last year.
Yeah. Clay McGuire should have been hired 2 years ago, right? I mean, that he should have been hired. I don't know how great or whatever of an offensive line coach he is, but he fits much better in the system, and someone like him or like him should have been hired 2 years ago. And that's kind of why USC is in this position right now. You're starting in year 3. You finally got an offensive line coach. Is it going to take a while to get all that to work? I don't know. As Shotgun mentioned, that's something you want to see, what he had this offseason, and how's the line going to look. He might be seeing some redshirt freshmen playing. We don't know. But it's, there's going to be a lot of pressure on that line. And now you finally got an offensive line coach that's run the system. You're expecting better results.
I always go back to just the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State. Just that was for me the point of no return, where you either make a change with the offensive line or you did what USC did. I'm just curious what USC's offensive line would look like now and its recruiting if they did make a change after that Cotton Bowl. It'd be a different story there. Before we jump into questions, it's almost the top of the hour. I just want to talk about, I know, crazy, right? The Pac-12 and realignment. It came out that George Kliavkoff, the new Pac-12 commissioner, met with the Big 12 commissioner, Bob Bowlsby, to talk about, just realignment things. He gave a quote to Dennis Dodd in his article that came out today that said, I would not be doing my job if I didn't take and understand and evaluate those opportunities to add schools. Ryan, I know you just did a podcast for the Podcast of Champions about, does the Big 12 even add value to the Pac-12? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's great. I think George Kliavkoff's in a good position. His conference wasn't torpedoed like the Big 12, and Bob Bowlsby, they feel bad for that guy, stabbed in the back by Greg Sankey. He can take his time, field all kinds of calls. Maybe it was just some kind of schedule alliance with the Big 12. Who knows? It looks like the playoff thing that we were all talking about is probably going to be delayed because of this Texas-Oklahoma stuff. The whole college football landscape is changing. He needs to be able to talk to these other commissioners and, see what's going on. I don't think the Pac-12 adds any value by bringing in the Big 12 schools. Unless it was like a full-on merger of all of them, even that I'm not sure. I just don't think, making that many more slices of the pie, those pieces of pie just don't get much bigger. So I think he's in a spot where he can stand pat. I think what you have to watch out for is the Big 10. You got Kevin Warren, who's the new commissioner there. The biggest, the worst thing that could happen to the Pac-12, as far as George Kliavkoff is concerned, is what happened to the Big 12, where your brand names leave, and it leaves you as a gutted conference that would be worth a lot less as far as the media rights go. So if the Big 10 said, we want to bring the California schools in there, without USC, without UCLA, Cal, and Stanford, that media rights deal in 2024 is not going to be worth anything as close to it. USC is the biggest brand. You got to have, USC involved in that. So he's got to keep an eye on Kevin Warren and, just not get shanked by him like Bowlsby got by Greg Sankey.
I think the big thing is you got to take every call Because one, when you go to the Big Ten and you talk to them, like, hey, well, the Big 12 offered is this. You got to be able to say that, the scheduling alliance. Yeah, we talked to them and they were willing to give us, this amount. Can you match that type of thing? Those, when they get into those type of negotiations eventually, scheduling alliance makes sense, to add some more marquee games and get rid of some of the, the lesser games that are on the schedule every year and kind of create some, kind of false rivalries maybe a little bit. USC is going to play Oklahoma State in basketball. Well, USC's played Oklahoma in basketball for, there's certain schools that don't like each other. Something happens and create a little bit of animosity, those type things, and it becomes, it builds up into something that could be fun, but they don't add much value other than that. But besides the alliance, now you look at it and just like Ryan said, like what would the Big 12 add to the Pac-12? You look at the TV markets that are remaining.
They're not very good.
I mean, what is the best? Waco? I mean, it's not very good when you're talking about an HGTV show is what you're known for. That's what Waco is.
Hey,
so,
don't be hating on that show.
I'm not hating on the show, but that's all Waco is really known for.
Sure.
They're a university and there's a show down there that they fix houses. So other than that, Lawrence, Kansas, and the places that you're looking at just aren't the TV markets that are going to bring in the big dollars. So it's great that they're talking, and Kliavkoff should go out and talk to everyone. And just like he said, that he was going to do, he's on a listening tour. Well, he's listening to commissioners and answering these phone calls and listening to what people have to say as well. Because there's some smaller schools, the San Diego States and the BYUs, that may look at the Pac-12 as well as potential options. So we'll see where it all goes. But you got to listen to everyone and see what they have to say first, and then start dismissing people. I'm like, the Big 12. See you later.
Yeah.
Ryan, I know you've been a long proponent of USC going independent, but how much does the USC brand kind of can flex their muscles right now in these realignment conversations?
100%. I think Dennis Dodd came out in his story today and said there's 4 major brands out there that can dictate what's going on. Michigan and Ohio State, and they're not going anywhere. They're in the Big Ten. They get $55 million a year, whatever. They're fine. Notre Dame, who's got their alliance with the ACC, that's a long TV deal. They're probably not doing anything either. And USC is the other one. And what we've learned from Texas and Oklahoma is, those big brands can run the show. It's the analogy would be, it's LeBron James. Like Lakers won a championship, in 2020, right? It's LeBron James. It's his show. It's not Frank Vogel's show. If LeBron James wants something done and Frank Vogel wants something different, LeBron James wins. He's going to be driving the bus. We've seen coaches come and go. The star players have the power. The star brands in college football have the power. And I did a radio show down in Texas today talking about that, and they asked me specifically, have USC flexed their muscle over the years? And the answer is absolutely not. They've had such poor leadership from the athletic director, from Pat Hayden to Lynn Swann. They didn't reflect the kind of draw and power that a brand like USC has. They went along with the Larry Scott parity model. They would take the exact same money as Oregon State. The previous TV deal, USC and UCLA got a little bit more money because they were LA. That changed in the new Pac-12 deal. And that was Pat Hayden allowing that to happen. And I don't think Mike Bowen's going to let that happen. Whatever happens with realignment, the good thing, you're a USC fan, you're in a good spot. There is no scenario where someone gets pilfered from the Pac-12 that USC wouldn't be involved. UCLA is a big brand in LA. There could be a thing where, USC goes, but UCLA doesn't. Oregon, they've been the most successful program in the last 10 years. Easily could get left behind. Anyone except USC, if you're in the Pac-12, could get left behind if there's some sort of poaching of the conference. So USC would always be involved in that. USC would get a better deal if they stay in the Pac-12 because they have the power to do that. And they're the only brand in the Pac-12 that could explore going independent. Say, hey, Netflix, we're going to put 7 home games a year. And that's the kind of stuff Netflix wants. They're looking for the huge show. They're not looking for, we're going to put up all these Pac-12 water polo games. They want a few huge events a year. And even the football games aren't big enough. They want like 50 million, like the Tiger King and that's the stuff that they're really looking for. But it's better for Netflix to have like all of USC's home games as opposed to like all of Pac-12. So there's options there for USC, and they're the ones that can drive this bus. So I think they have a leader in Mike Bone who can actually take the torch and run with it and flex a little bit of that power, that muscle. Texas and Oklahoma showed what is Baylor, what is a top 10 Iowa State without those big brands in the conference. It's not worth very much at all. Those are the brands that were worth half of that TV contract, two programs. How much of the Pac-12 TV budget or whatever is because of USC? I mean, it's a big portion of it. It's a lot more than Washington State and Oregon State, I tell you, and they're getting the same amount of money in a more expensive area. So whatever happens, USC is going to be in a better spot. They're going to be able to flex their muscles this time around like they have in the past.
Yeah, even if it's just based on cost of living. Cost of living
is way more expensive here in the Corvallis.
USC should be getting at least a little bit more than your Washington State or your Oregon State, which is how that's created that parity a little bit in several sports, is that those schools have been able to catch up a little bit with adding new facilities and different things, while USC hasn't been able to be able to do the same thing. So it's going to be fascinating. There's plenty of options for the Pac-12. There's plenty of options for USC. And from our chat with George Kliavkoff and Mike Bone, seems like things are, at least right now, are amicable, and I think that they are both headed in the same direction. Now, one slight move could change any of those things as negotiations go, but I think that they're aligned right now, and I think that's good for the rest of the Pac-12, that USC's not already being like, piss off, we're going our own way right now.
Yeah. I mean, if USC is going to take calls from the Big Ten and they go from making like $28 million a year in their TV deal to $54 million, and it'd probably be a bigger deal because the Big Ten gets to renegotiate that in 2023. I mean, you could double your TV revenue. Mike Bone has to take that call. You have to look at it like, the other teams are going to have to travel more. It's like, well, you got $30 million more a year in your athletic budget. You can have a few more flights. You have to at least entertain that. And USC is the one program that's go like that's. If anyone's getting poached, USC is top of the list.
But that's awful for fans and awful for the athletes. If USC goes to the Big Ten or something, it's going to be terrible. Now, if the whole conference is different, but if USC alone goes, it's not going to be good for student athletes. You're supposed to be caring about the well-being of the student athletes. Oh, well, you guys are going to have to miss at least 3 days of class for any event that you go to. Oh, you got 35 games in a basketball season? No. Well, sorry, you're just going to be tutored the entire – like, what's the use in even going to class anymore? Everything should be on Zoom.
Yeah, I don't think USC should go by themselves, but it would be some sort of group. And there's a lot of options for groups. It could be the California schools. USC and UCLA could just be a package deal. It could be bigger markets like Oregon, USC, Arizona State, because you get Phoenix and UCLA or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of options there. And if you had a West Coast pod where there's 4 teams on the West Coast, I think that would make it a little more palatable.
Overall, I think we thought good things coming out of the off-the-record meeting with George Kliavkoff, like Shotgun mentioned. Just out of curiosity, Ryan, what do you think this time would look like if Larry Scott was still the commissioner of the conference? Because, I mean, now it almost seems like a second chance for the Pac-12 to kind of reinvent itself with the TV rights deal expiring soon. I mean, is this a second chance now that you have a new guy at the helm?
It's definitely a second chance. You needed new vision, and I think some of the old thoughts about Larry Scott, things were great 10 years ago when you signed that deal, but it was very short-lived, and it's a very outdated deal. I mean, I guess the ACC's is pretty bad too, and it goes for an extremely long time.
2036.
You're
apparently.
way better doing these shorter deals. The Big Ten's get another re-up, a couple re-ups while the Pac-12 deal is still going on. And I think if you're USC, it's better to have George Kliavkoff in there because they recognize your value. He's talked about, hey, parity sucks. We don't want parity. We want our best brands. He's like, they're not going to put something in the schedule to make Oregon look bad or USC look bad so we can help out, Colorado or Oregon State. Like, that's not going to happen. They're not going to put their best brands in harm's way. The Big Ten wouldn't do that to Ohio State. The SEC wouldn't do that to Alabama. But the Pac-12 continually did that to their big brands. So that's going to go away. So I think all of that has been helpful. I think Larry Scott would have had to see the writing on the wall and shift focus, but you needed a complete reversal of what his old policies were. And the fact that many, many times Kliavkoff was like, parity sucks, no parity, we don't want parity. It's like, that was Larry. I mean, we asked Larry Scott that, and he said he wanted parity. And it's like, no, that's exactly the wrong answer. It's just, you had the exact wrong philosophy. So that's why he needed to go. Who knows what was going on, but thank God we don't have to think about that.
He would have just taken the leftovers. He would have waited till all the dust settled, and taken the leftovers. There would have been no proactive approach to it. It would have been very reactive, and after everything happened, they'd be like, oh, we should probably do something now. It's like 4 years after Oklahoma and Texas are in the SEC.
Yeah.
He'd be trying to figure out something to do then.
Overall, do you see this as the start of a new evolution of college football? Like, do you see super conferences happening? What do you see down the road?
I mean, you got to be careful what you wish for, because, yeah, I mean, the SEC is already going to be a super conference. We'll see what it is. And, do you need to combat that with more super conferences? If they could go to 10 conference games in the SEC just so everyone can start playing each other, and then you don't get some of those other out-of-conference games that are fun for fans. So I think you can lose. This isn't, just making a few extra bucks doesn't always mean it's better for the sport. The more regionalized it becomes, that's worse. I think the West Coast is important. You need to be able to keep the West Coast relevant, and USC is going to be a big part of that. How that all comes together, though, I think the playoff can make things more fun, maybe a little more NCAA tournament-wise. Maybe you get some upsets, but we got to be careful because you're going down, making an extra couple of bucks or a lot of extra money. You might be losing, fans. You might be losing some of what makes college football great. And if it's only the SEC and that's all that matters, and the West Coast becomes apathetic towards college football, you're losing a lot of eyeballs. You already don't have the Northeast, the most populous area. That doesn't exist in college football. You lose the West Coast, you're going to keep the Big Ten footprint. You're going to keep the South, but you could lose 2 more time zones out west, and that wouldn't be good for the sport.
Yeah.
It just seems like it could be old becomes new again. It was very regionalized up until the 50s or so, 60s maybe, just with commercial airline, the explosion of that, where the USC Notre Dame game, that's why it was so special, is because you had to take a train and go all the way across the country. That was a week-long trip. Or you could see much more regionalized type things, and then the regionals, when you get to an NCAA basketball tournament or baseball tournament, is truly the first time that, after you play in your regional, then that's the first time you're really seeing teams from the other parts of the country. With the super conferences, if you go to 10-game conference schedule, then that could definitely be it.
Alrighty, well, let's jump into questions. It's already 8:03, which is crazy.
Man.
I know, right? We got a question from Cam Man, who says, huge SC fan, live in Nashville, Tennessee. We'll be there in October to see Utah game. Any news on the time of kickoff?
Yeah, usually we don't get those till like a week or two before.
10-day windows is what usually the case.
7.
Some of the big ones are there, but I wanted to put his comment up because he's a big fan
there you go.
Tennessee. So thanks for watching the show.
We do know that San Jose State is 2 p.m., correct?
I believe 2 p.m.
I think
Pacific.
so, yes. Snap247 said, will Drake London be a Biletnikoff finalist?
Yes.
I think so. How many finalists do they have? 20?
3 finalists.
Yeah.
Michael Pittman was one of 3.
Yeah. The last USC player to win, the only one I think was Marquise Lee.
Yep.
Yeah, I think he's got a good chance at that.
Who wasn't on the watch list to begin the season, but
right.
You got to say it every time, but yes. Dallas had a question for Shotgun, who said, how are you feeling about USC's linebacker depth? They will be key to the defense, making strides forward over the past couple of years.
Well, there's a lot of depth.
Right.
Not certain on a lot of it, but there's a lot of depth. A lot of guys coming back from injury. If everyone gets healthy, I think it's a position of strength for USC because you have 2 guys that played last year and took over those roles in Raylan Goforth and Kanai Mauga, but you also have experience in a guy like Jordan Iosefa. You got some young talent that hasn't really got an opportunity to get on the field, like Elijah Winston, or some older talent, couple, 3rd year for him. Solomon Tulialapupu, 2 guys coming out of high school I thought could be, early contributors, but have suffered multiple injuries there. So you're talking about the middle guys. I think that there's enough depth there that you're not really concerned if everyone gets healthy. On the outside, you got Drake Jackson and potentially Korey Foreman at that other outside linebacker position. You got Hunter Echols coming off the other edge. You can do some different things. So I think the linebackers can be a position of strength, but outside of Drake Jackson, you got injury concerns and you haven't had consistent production. And even Drake Jackson, it wasn't consistent last year. So, there's some consistency issues with that group, but a lot of depth.
A lot of bodies. Similar to the offensive line. There's a ton of bodies. There's like 19 scholarship offensive line, but how many of them can play? We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And some guys with experience, some guys that, we think have a lot of talent. We'll see.
Yeah.
We shall see indeed. We got a question from Dallas who said, how long before the SEC starts shedding some of its schools to cut loose the deadwood programs?
Yeah, so that's where you also can kind of get into trouble. Will conferences start doing that? Is like, a Vanderbilt's like winning baseball championships, but they're not really helping on the football side. Like Oregon State winning baseball championships, they're really helping out on the football side. If you're getting these super conferences, you start cutting these bottom teams. I mean, the problem is, it's different from the NFL. You're creating this sort of like mini NFL, like you have a 16-team SEC, and if you're going to play 10 games, you're almost always playing each other. That's going to leave a lot of losses. There are going to be a lot of teams, and it's unlike the NFL. If you're the 0-16 or whatever, 1-15 Jacksonville Jaguars, you don't get Trevor Lawrence the next year. You get nobody. So there's no built-in way to try to bring the bottom teams up. Arkansas could just be like 0-12 year after year in this new SEC. And then what are you going to do? The fans aren't going to really like that. You can say, SEC, we're in the SEC. Yeah, you haven't won a game in 2 years. There's some issues with this super conference stuff. And if you cut the bottom teams, someone else is going to become the bottom team. Is all of a sudden like Georgia's like, yeah, we can't even get a winning record anymore. They won't do that. Yeah.
We got a question.
Back to Tennessee, always.
I mean, like Tennessee won a
Once a
championship in 1998, and I mean,
barely done anything since.
Yeah, it's like they could be a bottom dweller.
The interesting thing you brought up that is kind of going towards an NFL model, but you would need a college football commissioner, czar, or something to establish and set up if there were these 4 super conferences with 16 teams or something like that, where you would have enough crossover like you do in the NFL, where you play a certain division every year, but you also play the team from the AFC that finished in the same position as you finish in your division, things that equal things out. Because, like you said, there quickly becomes a huge separation, because if you're constantly losing, you don't get Trevor Lawrence. Just like you said, there's no automatic. And if there was a college football commissioner, czar, or whatever, relegation would be so much fun.
Oh my God, relegation would be
That would
great.
be really fun.
Hate soccer, love relegation.
I mean, how much could we see? I mean, I already asked this, but with the transfer portal, we've heard Clay Helton already say that it's kind of like NFL. Could we even see college football get more NFL-y, if you will?
Yeah, I think everything's moving that way because of money.
Yeah. But there is no Roger Goodell running college football. He has what's best for the NFL in mind. Everyone else is doing what's good for their little fiefdoms,
And it's not even like the NFL where you have revenue sharing, you have a salary cap and all these things. It's much more like Major League Baseball, where it's whoever wants to spend the most money in IL. If you've got the right people that are around your program, or if your program is producing the right athletes that are getting NIL deals, that's only going to build on itself. So it could become a very quick. I mean, it already is. There's been 4 teams in the college football playoff that have taken up 75-80% of the spots. So is it going to be even worse? And I think that's why you're seeing declining ratings. You're seeing less fans at games. And if there's not an overall commissioner to step in and say, hey, this is better for the sport, for the game of college football, then you're going to get, it almost feels like college football could go the way of like a water polo, where it just becomes such a regionalized sport and you have certain teams that are always really good, and those are the only teams that really have a shot.
Yeah.
We'll see. A Dog's Life in Portland says, are there any teams in the Mountain West, remnants of the Big 12 or independents, that you think the Pac-12 might be interested in to form a Pac-16 or larger? I'm not going to even go for it.
I mean, there's some concerns with academics and different things like that. Just as far as athletics, straight up athletics, I think the schools you would look at are like BYU and San Diego State and maybe Boise State as far as the teams that are in the Mountain West and out this way.
Maybe like Fresno State or something. I mean, but it doesn't help. Like, you don't need more pieces of the pie. You don't need to cut it up in more slices. Unless you're adding someone that's a huge draw, it's not worth adding at this point. The way that
I mean, if you can give them basically no money, if you can give them whatever they're getting in the Mountain West, then maybe.
Yeah, we had a question on the podcast of champions. They're like, the Pac-12 should take like 4 of the teams, like Oklahoma State, Baylor, TCU, and Texas Tech or something like that. Or they said Kansas, but they're only going to give them like as much money they would get if they joined the AAC plus like $1 million. And then if they could get a full share if they won the conference. So it was sort of like this incentivized thing. I'm like, I just don't think that's going to work. But yeah, you could bring in like San Diego State, but like, yeah, you only get like a third of a share or something. Like,
I mean, this is the same reason why relegation would never work, because nobody's going to agree to that.
Yeah.
If you're Washington State and there's a chance that you get relegated, you're never going to be like, yeah, I think relegation was great for the sport of college football.
No.
We got a question from Coley who says, any word on rising Pac-12 team Arizona State? Will the season be over before the NCAA decides on possible discipline?
Yeah, so all they've done is suspend with pay their tight ends coach, and they promoted like a staff or support staffer kind of guy. I think that came out today, actually. So I don't know. I mean, this is just there's going to be another shoe dropping. We just don't know when. But from the allegations seem pretty serious. There's a freaking dossier about all this stuff. I mean, if the NCAA comes down, I mean, this could be a huge blow. But when will it be? This is a team that looks like they're poised to make a great run in 2021. So it's probably in their best interest to hold off on as long as they can. And that seems to be the strategy that they're using. So the NCAA doesn't usually move very fast. At this point, it's looking like, I mean, who knows? It just could happen like the day before the season starts and Antonio Pierce gets fired. Like, who knows? I mean, it's just something you got to watch. But they're certainly on. You know, we asked Herm Edwards about it at Pac-12 Media Day, and he was just like, everything's fine, no big deal. And but something's going to happen there. We just don't know when.
Yeah, it's not like a suspension in a professional, or you're like, oh, I'm going to appeal it until we get past this series that's really important, and then we're playing the bottom team. Then okay, I'll take my suspension. You don't get to choose when the NCAA is going to actually rain down a decision, and those decisions can take forever. Like you've seen the FBI college basketball investigation, USC. That was what 2016, 17, and USC just got theirs done, and Arizona just had theirs finally announced from the NCAA. Or no, they're still under theirs, I think. So Kansas is still waiting for their. So when are those things going to be finished? Who knows? So how long Arizona State's take is anybody's guess. The dossier that they were given, I think that expedites it and pushes it up much quicker. But still, it's the NCAA, and they have like an enforcement staff of like 3 people or something. Yeah, it's not like they have 150 people that are going out and investigating these things. So it's not something you normally expect to be super quick.
Mm-hmm. It's 8:13, so we're probably going to get into rapid fire pretty soon here. We got an interesting question from Jasper Smith who says, without Bru McCoy, will Michael Tree be given a look at wide receiver instead of tight end? I think you should put it on the table.
I mean, him and Epps, where are they going to line up? Are you calling them a tight end and yet they're playing outside every time? Like, they're just taking the Drake London position? Then you can call them whatever you want to, but he's truly a wide receiver. Then if they never put their hand on the ground, they're never in the backfield or anything like that. So, how the semantics of it, USC could call him a tight end, they could play wide receiver. We'll see.
Ryan, any thoughts on that?
If you want to put the question up.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry, I just put it up there. So this is what we're going to have to see. I don't know if Bru McCoy not being there is going to change how they run everything, and there's 2 back sets or multiple tight ends and things, but there are a lot of options, and there are just some big bodies. I think that's one of the things we just have to watch through fall camp, and we're probably not going to report on all that stuff, kind of formations and things like that. But Graham Harrell does have a lot of options at his fingertips. And I don't know which direction they're going to go. I mean, just, like even talk about Drake London, where he ends up lining up. Do you see more rotation? Do we see, we sort of saw these set groups all the time. It was just kind of the same thing over and over again when Shotgun does the charts and showing where everyone's lining up. But there really could be options where you're running out 4 different guys in different, different plays. Not just bringing in one guy that you can key on, but they're really just mixing up and putting, 2 big tight ends, or maybe they're hand on the ground, then they move out to the slot and they're just, they're standing up. They're these big bodies that you can create mismatches with. So I think there's a lot of options. I just don't know which direction they're going to go with it.
I mean, we saw more 2-back sets and 2 tight ends, and that was something they did in the spring because of the limited bodies at wide receiver. I don't think that you're going to be limited down to 3 or 4 guys, scholarship guys, in the fall at any point. So I don't expect to see it until they actually show it more. They've used them like 3, 4, 5% of the time. They've used a 2-back set or a two tight end set, but it's not something they consistently look at as, hey, this is something that's part of our base packages that we use. So until they show more of it, I mean, there were plenty of chances in the past to use 2-backs. There's plenty of chances to add 2 tight ends if they really wanted, and they haven't really done that much.
We got a question from Mark on Facebook who says, will Robert Steiner's program reduce the yearly plague of injuries this season?
Hard to say. There's not like a direct correlation between that, but there's sometimes you see a rash of hamstrings, or you see there's different things that happen. I like, from what the players have told us, seems like there's a lot of core stuff. There's a lot of just body weight things that you're doing that I think could help with some of the soft tissue injuries that maybe we've seen in the past. That would be my guess, but wait to see. You could just get a rash of injuries that's nobody's fault, You could literally
just get guys get their ankles stepped on the wrong way. That happens, unfortunately.
Yeah. We had a question from Mike on Facebook who says, do you think USC has any first-team All-Americans this season?
Ooh. I mean, Keith Slovis could be. Drake London could be.
I mean, if Drake London's a Blitnikoff finalist, then I think he's definitely there in the mix. And at least one of the publications would give him one. So I'll say yes. And Drake Jackson's another guy. He has an opportunity to take a big step forward. I think it was, 6.5 sacks his freshman year, only 2.5 last year in the shortened season. Need to see him bounce back and have a big season for USC's defense to do what it's capable of.
Yeah.
Josh on Facebook wanted to know, what are our thoughts on Cortland Ford? He said it seems like he's the best option at left tackle. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, he's someone I definitely want to spend a lot of time watching this fall. He'll probably get significant first-team reps at left tackle, as I'm guessing. And, I think San Jose State, a month from now, my guess is he's probably going to be the starting left tackle. So someone you definitely want to check out.
I mean, he's the leader going into it, but there can be big jumps, especially second-year guys. Is he going to take one of those big jumps? And, like we've talked about earlier, with the not having a regular offseason last year and the pandemic and everything, do we see some of those older guys, those veterans that were moved to a new spot last year, do we see them take a jump forward? The guys that took over those starting roles last year, are they going to be able to take a jump? If so, maybe that changes what USC is looking at. Maybe Jonah Monheim gets in the mix. There's different options there, but right now, definitely the leader going in.
We got a question from Michael on YouTube who says, what are the chances that USC wins the Pac-12 this year?
Finished from the media poll second, well, would be behind Oregon, but to win the Pac-12 South. Yeah, I think there's a decent chance. I think Oregon's probably still going to be the favorite, but we could watch this team for the first 5 or 6 games and say, oh yeah, this is a team that's ready to go. Or we could see, man, they're just still squeaking by teams they should beat. If that's the case, and they're playing like kind of they did the beginning of last year, even though they went undefeated in the regular season, and you don't want fourth quarter comebacks against teams like Arizona. So if they're still doing stuff like that, they're probably not going to win the Pac-12. But if they're playing up to their potential, which we haven't seen USC do, yeah, I think they got a real good chance to win it. They should win. They should win the Pac-12 this year, but should have won it last year, and they didn't.
They got a good chance. They got enough talent, but if the offensive line takes a step forward.
Yeah.
We got a question from Walker Lamer who says, do you all see Graham Harrell leaving after this season for a big payday? Depends on Keaton Slovis.
It depends on what they do. Like if the USC offense struggles, he's probably not leaving for a big payday. I mean,
he and Keaton Slovis are pretty much attached to the hip. So if Slovis has a big season, goes in the NFL drafts, first-round pick, then I think that's much, much more likely that you see Graham Harrell, look at another opportunity potentially. Because I think his stock would then rise back up to where, people will be like, oh, 2020, you'll forget about that. That was a pandemic. Everything was weird, because his name was really hot coming out of 2019. Mm-hmm. And if USC takes that step forward, it's still a big question mark, but it could be.
We got another question from Walker Lamer who says, will the Coliseum field be well maintained or maintained better than it has been since the Rams can play at SoFi now?
Sure. That only helps, not having multiple games and having the immediate switchover and everything, just extra wear and tear. So,
yeah, we would see them after USC games, just like going to work on the field like right away, like stuff like that. You don't have to do that. You can just kind of maintain. You don't have to repaint everything. I think it's going to be better.
Dog's Life in Portland says, do you think there's an arms race to reach the first mega conference, forcing the breakup of the NCAA?
I don't. There's already a mega conference, and then
it means more.
Yeah. So I don't think there's like some arms race for that. There's two huge conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC. Does the ACC make a move? We'll see. Conferences are going to make moves to make themselves better, not for any other reason, not to make college football better. So if the ACC says, hey, we can like merge with the Pac-12 and have this East Coast, West Coast kind of conference thing on lockdown, they might do something like that, or the Big Ten or whatever. But those conferences are going to do what's best for them, not for college football.
Whatever happens with the realignment, can we just get rid of the numbers? Don't need a Big Ten that's got 12 teams. We don't need a Big 12 that's now got 8 teams. We don't
second that motion.
At least the Pac-12 changed when they were Pac-10. Like, we'll move up. But the bigs, change your name. Get something better.
Yeah.
Come up with something creative.
I agree.
The Freedom Conference or something. I don't know.
Freedom Conference.
I don't know. Bravery Conference.
Okay.
What were their?
The
what
Braveheart Conference.
The Big Ten got screwed with the Leaders and Legends thing.
Where's the Leaders
Conference? That did not
Conference?
go over well. Like that was like, oh, that's terrible.
We got multiple questions about USC's run game. Red Feather said in all caps, will USC be successful without a running game? And then we got a tweet from NW Trojan who said, what exactly do you think USC's offense can do to improve short yardage running?
Do different things.
Yeah.
Not run the same play over and over as a hurry up real quick and the other team knows exactly what's coming, a good majority of the time.
Be tougher on the line, push people around. I think you got to do that. And they can be. Shotgun said this could be a 10-2 team with like poor offensive line play.
With a little bit of improvement, a little bit of creativity. That was something that I'm kind of miffed that we haven't seen more creativity out of this offense at times.
Why do you think that is, Shotgun?
Arrogance. Graham Harrell saying, my offense will work. Just run the grass and do what we do and it'll work. Rather than saying, how can I create a better mismatch with Drake London? Let me move him. Now he's not, as Keaton Slovis called him, the ultimate mismatch because who's going to guard that guy? But also, like, if you see, they got a freshman nickel back in there. Let's put Amon-Ra St. Brown on him. Let's move him in motion to get him matched up with that guy and let him go to work and toast that guy. And you create different things, moving the safeties out of the way with other receivers or whatnot. But they do that. They'll put a couple plays in for games, but I feel like they could do more of it. I feel like Graham just has the ultimate confidence, and maybe that's the arrogance, in his offense that it will work. And we've seen it puts up a bunch of yards and stuff, and if you convert on third and shorts, then the offense will go. But I think they could also sprinkle in a little bit more creativity.
Yeah. They need to score more points. Like, they don't score enough points. Literally, like,
yes,
they don't
Ryan.
score enough points.
Seems like a very basic answer, but yes.
Score more points.
Couple more questions before we wrap this puppy up. We got a question from SoCal Ant who says, why can't SC play better Power 5 teams in non-conference games?
I don't understand this criticism. You play Notre Dame every year. You got BYU that had a great record last year. You got San Jose State that won the Mountain West. Like, this is a down year. This was a year they had to replace UC Davis. So Pat Hayden started to get away from some of the cool scheduling because he wanted more home games and stuff. So I think you have to kind of build that back into it. But that's never been an SC problem. Having Notre Dame and, those are all teams that had great records last year. They're all on the schedule. So
He asked a couple different questions about this. How long in advance does it take to book a big game? We found out this season it doesn't.
Right.
You can do it that week. Coastal Carolina and BYU.
But typically they're scheduled years
Yes,
in advance.
that was
Normally they are,
unique.
which can change. Hey, this program looks really good now. USC's playing Ole Miss. Will Ole Miss be good when USC plays them? They were 5 years ago or whatever. Will they be? Who knows? So that can be into it. Whose decision are those? That's the athletic director, but also presidents and stuff will have a say. Sometimes this matchup gets made because someone went to this school.
Yeah.
Those things happen.
I mean, Lane Kiffin goes to Ole Miss, and they schedule Ole Miss.
Yep.
So,
Why book a game with San Jose State? Well, Ryan could tell you they wanted to get rid of UC Davis and listen to the fans. But also San Jose State, is a bye game. They're called bye games. So you do this in basketball, you do this in football, you do this in baseball. We're going to buy for you to come out instead of doing a home and home, instead of us going to your place. We're going to buy out that portion of it. We're going to pay you $1 million for a football game to come to our place, and we're not going to come back to your place. So you play those games, so you get an extra home game. So USC is going to play 7 home games this year. So that means extra revenue coming in for all the ticket sales and all that stuff. But also your fans get to see you more, build up that, and also an extra win. That's why the SEC teams play Eastern Kentucky in November.
Yeah.
So that you rest your body a little bit and you can go to the stretch
Citadel
run.
and
All that stuff. So there's a lot of different reasons to go into it. So, but USC has gone away from trying to schedule that FCS game. They realized the fans didn't want that because they're one of 3 schools that has not done that.
Yeah.
So they don't want to be, and it's their 2 rivals, so they don't want to give up anything.
USC's lucky to have San Jose State on the schedule this year. There wasn't a lot of options, so kudos to Mike Bowen for making that happen.
And that's a good team they're going to face.
Yeah.
Brian wanted to know, do we expect to see Solomon Tuialupupu in pads at the start of fall camp?
Not touching it.
Yeah. I'm going to say yes.
I'm going to say no because you said at the start of camp and no one's going to be in pads. Bam.
Semantics are important. Coley White says, most important must-win game for USC this regular season.
San Jose State to start.
Utah.
Yeah, Utah's a big one. It's at home. If you're talking about trying to win the South.
Could be 6-0. And then going with the bye week going into Notre Dame. So
Yeah.
In line with the Coley question, I'm going to say Notre Dame. So if you win Notre Dame, that probably means that you're winning everything before the schedule. And Clay Helton hasn't been over the win in South Bend hump yet. So we shall see. So I guess that's going to be my answer. Alrighty, guys. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this show? Fall camp on Friday. Off season is coming to an end. I'm excited to see some hitting, some football. It's going to be exciting. Any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
Yeah, no more off season. Let's get into fall camp. We might have to start doing the shows back on Sunday again, Keely. What do you think? Because I don't think they're practicing on Sundays. I think they're practicing next Wednesday, so it would be hard for us to do a show then.
Yes, that also means 7-day work weeks for us, which we're used to. But yes, we can discuss.
We'll have to discuss that. So stay tuned. We're gonna have to move the schedule around because now we got practices scheduled throughout the week. So we're gonna have to find days for the shows when there's no practice. But yes, stay tuned for that. We're very excited to be back here.
Should be fun.
Broadcasting live, talking about USC Jordan football.
Yep. Sade, close us out.
should be fun. Let's see what happens. A lot of question marks. A lot of things they're curious to see where people are going to be, what they try to do to address some of the issues that they do have. I thought they've done a good job through the offseason. Now it's time for the season. Can you continue what you started in the spring, started with the transfer portal, all those type of things? Can you build on it, or are we going to see a plateau?
Yeah. Winning the offseason is one thing. Winning in the season's something else.
Is that the official noise of a plateau, Shotgun? Nice. A 1960s kid said, will there be instant analysis on Friday? 1960s kid, come on. Would it be fall camp without instant analysis? Yes. So be sure to look out. USCfootball.com will have full coverage of fall camp and the first day. So stay tuned for that. But that's going to wrap it up for Tunnel Vision. That's Shotgun. That's Ryan. I'm Keely. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.